Hello there. In this video, I want to talk about leadership. Now, you may already know you're a leader because you have a title, but even if you don't have the title of leader as a formal role, you're still leading sometimes. And the most important person you're leading is yourself, but sometimes you're leading a group of friends to make a decision, or sometimes your spouse needs you to lead into exploring a topic, for example. So you'll get something out of this conversation. And I want to start with a story. And back when I was the director of a nonprofit, my style of leading was always looking for what I couldn't see on the surface. So I loved listening and I loved doing lots of one-on-ones with people. And I would just allow them to set the agenda. So during one of these one-on-ones, my program manager wanted to talk about a challenge that he had with one of the people who reported to him. And I noticed he had a little emotional tinge to the story that he told. And he was frustrated, quite frankly, because he couldn't understand the behavior of this employee that reported to him. And so I listened to him to describe, the data points. And then when he was done, I just tipped my head and I said, why does that bother you? So he had never been asked a question like that before, and it led to a really interesting conversation that led him to gain an insight about himself and how he led. And he was able to switch the perspective on the incident, and sort of the emotion ended up dissipating, and he could make a more effective decision. And so, many times leaders learn how to manage things. And that's not really leadership. Management is sort of non-people oriented, really, or managing, making sure that people put their time card in on time. But think about what is leading. Leading is to lead. And you are more effective at leading when you first understand yourself. So, my name is Dr. Deborah Lukovich, and what I love doing is helping individuals, leaders, and organizations uncover the unconscious hidden dynamics underneath the surface of what is seen that is shaping their decisions, their relationships with their coworkers or their employees or their boss, and then also inevitably performance. And so many times when, we're not happy with performance, we go to strategy. And often there's something deeper that is in the way. And so even if you try different strategies, and sometimes it seems like you can spend time by avoiding going deeper and just like, let's try this strategy. But really, over time, you're wasting time. So by going to the root and learning how to see what you can't see, which is my specialty, then sometimes you're saving a lot of time and you're being more effective. So, a lot of people come to me and they notice this about people who are leading them. So, the statistic that 85% of people end up leaving jobs because of their boss, because of their manager, or because of the leader at the top, not because they don't feel joy in doing the work. So, if you're a boss, just know that for the most part, people who leave the role that you're managing or leading, it's because of you, even though they don't say it. And there's four typical ways or things or behaviors that, the leader is doing. Number one, a leader sometimes is avoiding conflict. So they might give a directive because they don't know how to talk about the issue. So they might come across as aggressive, or they might come across as passive aggressive, where they're trying to be nice, but there's this tinge of resentment that they even have to deal with this. Uh, Often leaders and a man leader actually brought this up to me as in sometimes this is a gender thing. Often leaders are desperate for approval. And so when, you need approval, you're actually not going to be authentic and you're not going to be vulnerable. And vulnerability is one of the things that helps you form a deep connection with people who work for you. Uh, also, leaders, yes, they're under a lot of pressure, but they sort of pass that stress down to their employees by being defensive. And so, you want people to feel comfortable bringing issues to you, and you want to assume that not everybody's very good at it. So, when you take things personally, what do you expect them to do? So many times leaders are actually defensive, and then emotions always get in the way. So, an employee can tell that you're emotional. When you're overly aggressive, that's not strength. That's actually revealing your insecurity. So, these four things that leaders can do really get in the way of you being an effective leader. So, here are a couple of concepts that might help you become more aware of yourself and your leadership, and also, teach you then how to use your self knowledge to, sort of look at the person that works for you in a different way. And so, Carl Jung, one of the founders of depth psychology, which is the study of the unconscious, would say that between you and me, or let's say between you and a subordinate, there are four conversations going on. And most of it is at an unconscious level. And I'm not talking about like, are they sitting with their arms crossed or, yeah, I'm not talking about the obvious body language. I'm talking about really deep in the unconscious, and you're not able to pick up on it because you don't know how. You don't know how the unconscious speaks. So the four conversations that are happening is number one, conscious awareness to conscious awareness. So you are communicating something, and let's say the employee is nodding their head. And even that could mean they agree with you or they don't agree with you. So even that could be tricky. But let's say you think, well, they look like they understand what I'm saying. I think I'm communicating what I mean to communicate. But if there's any emotion involved, you're not. I'll just tell you that right off. And so then the other conversations that are happening is that the other person's unconscious is sensing and receiving things that you don't know you're even communicating, and vice versa. And most of the conversation that's happening is at the unconscious level, especially when there's emotion. So we're going to talk a little bit about projection in a little bit. So, but most of the conversation is at an unconscious level. You could even say there's a playground there where something in one person's unconscious is actually trying to trigger something in your unconscious. And when that comes to the surface, you may go, "What is happening?" Or then you're triggered, and now it's just really a mess. So, those are the four conversations that are happening. And I think most leaders aren't really trained beyond just that obvious body language. And also, their emotions get in the way. The next concept that I want to share is what I call the three P's of relationships. Now, I often talk with my clients related to more romantic and intimate relationships, but my three P's framework really applies to any kind of encounter, no matter how short or long. And so those P's are purpose, projection, and permanence. So believe it or not, even in the workplace, every person that you're working with, whether you like them or not, especially if they're really difficult, there is a hidden purpose. And your unconscious actually is hoping that you will gain a new insight through this difficult relationship. And it's often not possible to see what the lesson was until after maybe the person leaves, or if you are able to catch yourself and I'm going to share a communication tool that you're like, oh, that's what was happening there. That thing was triggered, and it was triggered so that I can resolve that issue. Because believe it or not, our patterns of thinking and behaving and reacting they're rooted in our childhood experiences. So often it's our 8-year-old self that's reacting to the situation. And honestly, anytime there's more than just neutrality involved, you're not really seeing the truth of the situation. You're assigning meaning to it that's really mostly not true. So that's purpose. So one of the things that you can do in your workplace, especially when there's difficult people or there's a personality conflict, is to start to ask yourself, what is happening here? What is being stirred up in me? And so, what's the lesson that I'm to learn? That trait that they have, maybe I'm supposed to be more like that. And it only bothers me because I'm not like that. Now, the second P is the juicy stuff. So, that's the concept of projection. And what we mean there is that each person has a lens and a framework, and it's based on our unique individual experience of our childhood, our education, our culture, our all of it, right? All of our experiences. And we sort of look at the world through that lens. And sometimes we're not very good at realizing that our lens is not the only lens, and our lens might conflict with another person's lens, and that may stir up emotion in us. And so, a typical example might be there's a really specific kind of projection that's useful in the workplace. So let's say there's someone that you work with, and it's either could be a subordinate, or maybe it's your leader, or maybe it's somebody who's a peer. And there's really something that bothers you about them. And at the same time, you admire them. So you might admire them because of what they've achieved, but then you might feel disdain for this personality quirk that they have. Now, in this case, the fact that you both admire them and feel disdain for them means that there's a trait that they have that your unconscious is saying you need to be a little more like that. Now, don't be confused. Your unconscious isn't saying be an asshole like that person is, because people can objectively do asshole-ish things. But your unconscious is saying, you need to step up a little bit, and you need to be more assertive. But you're thinking if you're more assertive, that means you're aggressive. I mean, for women, this is really a thing, right? Like how much is too assertive, how much is aggressive. And so, they've been trained to tone down, where sometimes they need to, take it up a notch. And it might feel morally wrong at first. But as you practice that trait of stepping up and getting out of your comfort zone, then your Overton window moves. And now you are comfortable being more assertive. So you can see how complicated it is that when you feel emotion about another person, it's never about what you think it is. Now, let's take somebody who there's nothing you can find redeemable about them at all. Well, in that case, why do they bother you so much, though? Who cares, right? So there's still something being stirred up in you that is about you. So it could be, for example, maybe something isn't fair. Maybe that person was promoted and you don't think they deserve to be promoted. So what is that stirring up in you? This maybe core belief that life isn't fair. So in that situation, you might feel more like a victim, and that's not true. So then we want to, go down to that core belief, and we want to change the core belief, because what will happen is at the bottom, if you think life isn't fair, you will continue to track situations and people that prove that life isn't fair. And this is a neuroscience thing. So your brain has a reticular activating system, and it looks for evidence of whatever your beliefs are. And most of our beliefs, science say, are in our unconscious. So even if you consciously say, well, I don't believe that, I go out and I make my own life, and yet you constantly find yourself sort of affirming that life isn't fair to you, well, then your unconscious and your conscious are in conflict. And your unconscious limiting belief is overshadowing, your conscious awareness about you're trying to be more confident. I hope that makes sense to you. It can get quite complicated. But even this, so now you can start to see when there's emotion in yourself, it's not about what you think it is. So just ask yourself, what is really happening here? What's happening? And journal about it. And then the last P is permanence. So when it comes in a romantic relationship, what I'm talking about here is that many people in a relationship, their love or the relationship is rooted in neediness and fear of being alone. And there's a spiritual saying that, what you resist persists, and what you fear, you will just make happen, not intentionally. You'll just drive that person away because you're in fear. So, so in a romantic relationship, the goal with my couples is to release the need for the relationship to last. And that sounds scary, but as soon as you release the need for it to be anything, then you are honest. And in the honesty, that's how you can overcome the friction points. And then you both grow. And so as you let go of the need for it to be permanent, you're more honest, you're more authentic, you work yourself through the friction point, you grow in your connection, and then you're actually more likely for the relationship to last and for it to be a quality relationship. So, in a workplace, what I'm talking about is outcome. So, this would mean that if you're attached to a certain way that things should go, whether it's an outcome that can be measurable, or whether it's the way that you think this person should be in their role, or that, you don't like the fact that they're introverted or whatever. Some things people just can't change about themselves. But if you can be more flexible and open, then what you're doing is you're making it possible for the other person to bring their best selves and their authentic selves to the table. And you will have a better relationship with the people who report to you. So that's the three P's. So I thought an example would be good. And I have a great example, a client of mine that I don't know, I think we've been working together for over 3 years, actually. And so it's so depth psychology how she came to me. We had a conversation um, we just had a conversation that was unrelated through networking. And based on that conversation, she was like, wow, this is really interesting. I think I need to work with you. So she came to me, we did an exploratory chat, and the initial topic that she came to me was difficulty in her relationship with her mother. So, and it was very confusing to her. And she had always had a great relationship with her mother, and then something happened in their family. And then ever since then, it just, it was sad, it was confusing, there was anger, it was frustrating for her. So that's how we started. And we worked together to explore what we call parental complexes. And that just means what are these earliest experiences in childhood that shape the way you respond to life experiences? Now, you don't have to have trauma or a difficult childhood. It doesn't matter. All of your patterns are rooted in your childhood experiences. So it might be that your parents were very affirming, but even that can turn into a negative complex because if they were always affirming and that's what you go out into the world and you just expect everybody to be like that no matter what, right? Now you're like, oh, your sense of, validation is dependent upon other people affirming you, right? So even something positive can eventually become an obstacle as you're, out adulting and then growing in your professional life. So we explored those complexes. Now, I ended up meeting with her and her mother, which is beautiful. That doesn't always happen. And there were some insights and there was some relief. Then, as we went on, she also loved to talk about dreams. And so dreams are forward looking. So as we explored these dreams that were coming up, that was very interesting. Well, it wasn't long before then our attention turned to her workplace. And she was part owner of a big company, and she had been there a long time, and so had this group of owners, and there were conflicts. And she was beginning to feel like she was crazy because she could see things that other people couldn't see, and she didn't feel like people listen, and just all sorts of things. And what I want to get across to you here is that what we discovered was that her mother complex, her mother wound, and the patterns that she got from a relationship with her father too, her parents, her parental complexes were showing up in the workplace. So we began to then connect those incidents that were happening in the workplace to this old, this pattern that was established earlier in life. And as soon as she could see it, then what happened is instead of being triggered, because even seeing it can dissipate the emotion, she became curious. Like, why? So not only why do I feel this way? Now I get it. Now my child self is coming up in this situation, but why now? Why is this being triggered right now? And her dreams were actually hints to what was happening or what was going to happen in her life. So then we started having conversations about particular incidents. And what I do in my practice is I do a lot of debriefing because that's the best way to see what's being stirred up and then to name it. And then you can kind of know, oh, there it is again. Now it's in a different situation. It's manifesting in a different way. What do we do about that? What's the core belief? How do we use neuroscience to change our belief system and slow down our reaction and our response and all of that. And then what was interesting is that then she brought me into the company. And as a culture, they wanted to work on enhanced communication and trust. So, what I did for them as a team, then, including all of the owners, is I used tools like Myers Briggs, which is actually Carl Jung's theory of psychological type, but they just created a commercialized form of it. I use Clifton's Strengths Finder and I use love languages. And what I did is I met with people on an individual basis, but then I drew a picture of how all of this overlapped. Now, what's different about how I look at these tools is I'm coming at it from a depth psychology angle. So I'm looking at what isn't seen. So, the not a mistake, but the basic level of, doing these things is, yay, I feel good about myself because I have these strengths. And yeah, I know I suck at that, but I'll use a system around it. And yeah, I'm extroverted, right? And so all it does is kind of like play to your ego, where from a depth psychology perspective, the juiciest stuff is in the shadow. And so, whether it's your top five strengths that we look at, oh, what's the dark side of those strengths? And many times, for example, competitiveness will come up as a top strength. Well, if you're in sales, that's an awesome strength to have to be competitive. But I remember asking one person, I said, how are you at losing? And he was like, oh my gosh, that reminds me of like we play these family games. And oh my God, I just end up being so emotional when I lose. So a strength has a shadow side. And so even when it comes to strengths and weaknesses and love language, and of course, the Myers-Briggs, I'm looking at it from a different angle and I'm trying to help you uncover and see things that are not obvious to you and that you're not conscious of. And that new insight can make the difference in your leadership effectiveness. So we did that, and there were measurable positive results in my work. And then what was really interesting is her whole life changed. And it was fascinating. So those dreams really were leading her. But what happened down the road with just an amazing, like life-changing opportunity was that happened because she did all of this work. And that caused this, not only caused this opportunity for her to actually see the opportunity in a way that she wouldn't have seen it before, she had the confidence. And I mean, it would have been striking if that opportunity had come a year before, she wouldn't have seen it. She wouldn't have felt confident about going after it. So that's a specific example of how often I will start with an individual that has a leadership position, and then I will go into the company and do something more company wide. Um, okay, so let's see. The next tool or concept um, is communication. So you know what they say, communication sort of is the root of, the quality of your relationship. And emotions always get in the way. But I would say one mistake leaders make is they'll be like, well, it's not personal, right? And yet they're just like, ew, just scolding. Don't take it personally. Like, That's one thing you should never say. Or the leader gets to be defensive and emotional and cut you off, but you don't get to be like, that's not good leadership. Because as a leader, you want to lead and you want to lead by example and you want to empower people to raise expectations for their own performance because they want to, not because you have the threat of a paycheck over them. So, and also, like in really lovely workplaces, especially nonprofits, there's scarcity. Or even in corporate environments, there's scarcity right now, and there's fear and stress. And that's a whole other thing to talk about. I'll put a link to my toxic workplace video in the description box here. So, I'm going to just go through a really quick explanation of how to use my version of Start with Heart, which is the first principle in the book Crucial Conversations. International bestseller, came out in 2004. I don't think you need to read the book, but I credit the book. I mean, because it can get complicated. All you need is this one principle, but if you really hammer on it, it can be quite magical. So, when would you use the start with heart? Well, Crucial Conversations defines a crucial conversation when there's a sense that somebody's at stake, something's at stake. And it could be your self-respect, it could be your job, getting fired, it could be a conversation around a raise, or it could be around I made a mistake, or I can't admit I made a mistake, but there's something that's at stake in the conversation. And the template goes something like this. It starts with making observations that are data points that nobody can argue with. So I've noticed, I've reflected that when this happens next, and then this, and they're all data points. They're specific examples that both people can say, yeah, that really did happen. You sent me this email and it said this. Here it is. Ooh, yeah, I sent that email. Or yeah, so I sent that email. And then I think. So the I think is explaining the natural consequence if that behavior continues. So if an employee feels afraid to tell you the truth about something, well, the natural consequence of them not being able to do that is at a certain point, it's going to come on you because you're the ultimate accountability, right? So you want to make it possible for people to come to you and say, hey, I can see that this is going to happen down the road. Now, as a leader, it's your job not to be defensive. So if you're defensive, well, that's why you need to work with me so we can figure out why you're defensive. So I see, I think, I feel there is a place for emotions. So the I feel might be for an employee, they should be, or maybe you're starting this conversation and you can say, I sense that there's discomfort on your part reporting certain things to me. And then if you've got an emotion, this is where to put the emotion. For some people, it's about respect and yeah, respect, fear, stress. Um, and then the next one is so I see, I think, I feel, I want. Now, the I want, this is from Crucial Conversations. So there's four parts to I want. I want for me, I want for you, I want for our relationship. So therefore, I would like to try this, or I want to put it out to you and see what your ideas are. Now, it's called Start with Heart because you're saying you want something good for them. So even if you don't like them, you need to care about them as a human being. So as the leader, you could say, I want uh, I want to have accurate information at all times so that I know how to provide the resources and guidance and direction that everybody needs in order to do their best. Okay. Or the employee, or so let's just go with that example. And then you could say, what I want for you is to feel safe reporting bad news to me. I need to hear the bad news. And I would like for you to feel safe doing that. Now, many people who report to people have an authority complex, and that comes from their parental complexes. So it doesn't matter if you say, oh, of course you're safe, you can do that. It doesn't matter. They have a fear, and you're a symbol of authority. And so this is where you can be not only self-aware, but you can be aware that this may be the case. And so again, I want to have up-to-date information, even if it's bad. I want you to feel safe, and I want you to know that I value the truth, even if I don't like it. And what I want for our relationship is that we have mutual appreciation for each other, for the different roles that we're playing. So therefore, I want to know, how can I help you feel safe? Now, for them, maybe they just don't want to communicate in person the bad news. Okay, have them do like a Google Doc and report it that way, or send an email. But you see, here's where the two of you can be creative. And then maybe you also suggest to them, well, would you like to work on this issue? And you could have them meet with me and I can work on their authority complex, right? And so that would be real leadership, and that you're actually developing their confidence to report bad news to you. So that's an example of my version of Start with Heart. And you can get a free template on my, and just use it right away on my website. So that's already a lot. So those are the thoughts that I wanted to share with you about leadership. So, as a leader, I guess the challenge that I would put out to you is next time you find yourself frustrated with somebody in your work environment, whether it's a peer, your boss, or somebody who reports to you, and there's emotion, start with the question, why does this bother me? If there's no emotion, there's really no problem. But then you want to be attuned to the person's emotional reaction. So maybe they're just the one that's triggered. And so if you're not, don't have the emotion because, oh, why is this so screwed up? Why can't this person do it right? Okay, if you got that emotion, you're not going to see things clearly and you're not going to be effective. So you need to get to the root of, why does this bother me? Now, if you don't have time to do it during the day, whatever, do what you're going to do, but then go journal about it and see if you can pinpoint. And I'll give you a shortcut. Here's how you can pinpoint the root. Slip into that emotion, that frustration with that employee or that kind of employee. And then ask yourself, what is my earliest memory of feeling this way? And you'll get a memory. And it'll be like something bad happened because in that situation, something negative happened. So that's why when this happens, like I don't know what it's going to be. It's really interesting what comes up. So just ask yourself, and even asking the question and let it go, you're already going to dissipate some of the emotion when you go deal with that situation. So that's a challenge I would put out to you. Um, and I guess really quickly, these are the different ways that I help individuals and leaders. I kind of gave you some examples, but I work with them to develop a better sense, deeper sense of self-awareness so that they can be present and not at the whim of their emotions. And what happens is when you have greater self awareness, then other people's behavior begins to make more sense and you can pick up on it. You could even go, huh, I sense fear. But if you were annoyed, you wouldn't be able to sense the fear. You would just be annoyed, right? And if you can sense the fear, then you can respond to the situation in a way that is going to get you the result you want faster. So, executive coaching, individual coaching, so executive, leader, and also individual coaching, also team facilitation. So, I can do group sessions on helping people understand these concepts and giving them tools that they can use right away. And then organizational, like discovery sessions. So maybe you just know where you're stuck, or maybe you know, like, I don't like this metric. We've tried this strategy, this strategy, this strategy. I am really great at asking the right questions and of people involved and seeing what's happening below the surface. And so I consider myself a facilitator of collective insight. And once you have that insight, then that leads to then your ability to see what you couldn't see before. And then suddenly you've got a whole nother path that you can take, something else to try. But without the initial uncovering of the insight, You're just going to try another strategy that's not going to get to the root of the issue. So that's all I wanted to share with you today. I love talking about this stuff. You can get lots of free resources at my website, deborahlukovich.com. I love doing podcast interviews. I'm really moving more into the organizational space. So you'll find a lot of things geared towards individuals, but you can apply that to yourself. And then, once you learn these things, how do we learn? By teaching. So you can share your reflections with people that report to you. And I'll tell you, that's number one way of building trust is sharing what you're learning about yourself. It works like magic, I have found. And what else? Also, I have a page devoted to individuals and midlife transition. And then also, and that's very much tied up in the workplace experience. And then I have another page for organizations. If you subscribe to my website, you'll get a free PDF of my last book, Your Soul is Talking. Are you listening? And it's different ways your unconscious is speaking to you. And then there's also a link to schedule to start a conversation with me. And finally, if you like this video, please share it with others who could benefit and like it and make a comment and save it. So that's it for today. Until next time.